Thank you all for being here. Let me just introduce somebody who I think doesn't really need much of an introduction. Bob Reich is well known throughout our country as being one of the best known and I think most effective economists in this country. Bob served for 4 years as the Secretary of Labor in the first part of the Clinton administration. And I remember his work very well. I was in the Congress, and in my lifetime, I have not seen a better Secretary of Labor, somebody who made it very clear whose side he was on that job. He stood up for working people. He did all that he could to protect the needs of workers. So it is an honor for me in this campaign not only have the support of Bob, but to have him here today to talk about some of the very important economic issues facing our country. Bob?
Well, thank you, Senator. I'm going to be very brief and then turn it back over to the Senator, and we will answer your questions. Presumably you have most of them, hopefully, for the Senator. We are now in the Institute for Research in Labor and Employment here at Berkeley. I want to just say something that's very obvious to all of you, but it's pro forma, but it needs to be said officially. This is not an endorsement by the Institute or by Berkeley, University of California. We are a public institution of any presidential candidate. I have, however, endorsed Senator Sanders because I am convinced that his vision for where this country needs to go and the policies that he has enunciated are necessary to deal with the widening gap between typical workers and those at the top, to reduce poverty, and to create an economy that is working for all of us instead of an economy that's working for a few at the top. Now, today, the United States Department of Labor, Bureau of Labor Statistics, announced that in May, only 38,000 new jobs were created. Now, I remember when I was Secretary of Labor and I would preside over those kinds of announcements, and it was also always very necessary to warn people and warn the press that you cannot see a trend out of 1 month's labor report. However, the Labor Department, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, also at the same time revised the last 2 months before May, March and April, and those revisions were downward. And so that the last 3 months, we've seen a market slowing in the creation of new jobs. The reason unemployment and the official unemployment rate is down is because so many people have left the labor market altogether. And if you are not in the labor market looking for a job, you're not even counted as unemployed. Now, I say that not to cast a kind of a cloud over either the economy or in any way to criticize the present administration, but just to give you some context for the kind of discussion we are going to have and why Senator Sanders' proposals are so important. We tend to be mesmerized in this country by the business cycle. When things are going well, when the expansion is taking off and jobs are growing, we get very, very pleased, as we should be. And then, as all cycles do, we get to a point where things slow. And if we're unlucky, they slow so much we enter into a recession. But behind that business cycle is a much bigger story and a more important story. And it has to do with structural changes in the economy that have occurred and have affected wages and jobs in very profound ways over the last 40 years. Between the Second World War and the late 1970s, the typical wage in this country tracked the growth of the economy. They rose in tandem. And we were on the path toward a more equal economy because even people in the bottom fifth of the wage ladder did very well. They saw their incomes grow during those 30 years faster than the incomes of people at the top. And so we congratulated ourselves in the late 60s and 1970s that we were doing extraordinarily well, and we were on the path toward an economy that was really working for everybody. We still weren't there. Women in the workforce were second-class citizens. We had a long way to go. African Americans also were second-class citizens in the workforce and in terms of voting rights. We had a long way to go, but at least we had the optimism and we had the political will to make the changes that were necessary. But since the late 70s, early 1980s, we've made a U-turn. And instead of everyone growing together, we have grown apart. Wages have stagnated. They've gone up a little bit, median wages. Today, the typical family, half of American families are actually worse off, adjusted for inflation, than they were in the year 2000. This so-called recovery has been very modest as recoveries go. And if it is slowing down, it's slowing down partly because Congress has not seen fit to implement the kind of policies that Senator Sanders has called for, such as major infrastructure spending and an end to austerity economics. But it's also because trickle-down economics, something that Senator Sanders also rightfully opposes, doesn't work. We've seen the wealthier get wealthier as their taxes have been cut over the past 30 years, and almost nothing has trickled down to the middle class. The middle class has been shrinking, and the ranks of the poor have grown. We now have a whole new class of people called the working poor. That should be an oxymoron, working poor. But many people now are working, and yet they are still struggling. And Senator Sanders' proposal to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour is critically important. It's important to those families, to those individuals. It's also important in terms of putting money in the pockets of people who will spend the money, and that spending has a multiplier effect. That spending will improve the economy overall. Now, I don't want to take away any thunder from the person you came to hear, but I just want to say that I could go through all of the policies that he has promoted, including Medicare for All, critically important, a single-payer program in terms of what average Americans have to cope with today, healthcare costs still going up. It is inevitable. We must do this. And the reason that I am supporting Senator Sanders is because he has had the courage to put squarely in front of the public issues that we as a nation must embrace. Finally, let me just say one thing. When you talk about widening inequality, typically economists, policy analysts will point to two things. One, globalization, and the second, technological advances that have displaced workers. But there is a third factor that Senator Sanders has also focused on, and that is the increasing political power of people who have a lot of wealth, big corporations, and Wall Street. Power to bend the rules, laws, and regulations to their advantage and to the disadvantage of many other Americans. If we don't see what's happening in terms of the vicious cycle of wealth and power in this country and how it's contributing to widening inequality, we are ignoring one of the biggest factors that is responsible for the stagnation of wages and the unfairness that so many people are experiencing. So, with that having said, with saying that, laying that groundwork, it gives me a great, great thrill, and I'm very privileged to present to you Senator Bernie Sanders.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you very much, Bob. There is a lot of anger in the United States today. We're seeing it every day. And the reason that people are angry and frustrated and scared is that by the millions They are working longer hours for lower wages. In my state of Vermont, and it is true in almost every part of the country, people are working 2 or 3 jobs. People are scared to death about what is going to happen to their children, who in increasing numbers are living at home because they can't afford a home or an apartment of their own. Young people who are leaving school, either dropping out of college or graduating college, incredibly in debt. And people are looking around and they're asking, what is going on in America? What's going on? And what they are understanding is there has not been some natural disaster that has impacted our country. But what in fact has gone on is there has been a massive shift of wealth from the middle class and working families, not even to the top 1%, but to the top 1/10 of 1%, who have seen a doubling of the percentage of wealth they own in the last 25 years. So this is not a circumstance, gee, it's too bad, everybody is hurting. What is going on is the middle class is suffering, the working class is suffering even more. We got 47 million people living in poverty, one of the highest numbers in the history of our country, and yet the people on top are doing phenomenally well, and many of the largest corporations are making record-breaking profits. Over the last 20 to 30 years, there has been a massive shift in wealth. Now, I know my Republican colleagues are very nervous about redistribution of wealth, but there has been a redistribution of wealth. Problem is, it's gone in the wrong direction. It's gone from the middle class to the top 1/10 of 1%. And that is where we are today. We are in a nation where people are angry and they are frustrated. They are unhappy about the current state of the economy, and they are fearful about the future. And then tied into that, as Secretary Reich said, is that we have a political system now where the billionaires on top are trying to cement their unfair advantages in the economy through a broken campaign finance system which allows them to buy and sell politicians through super PACs and other mechanisms. So what do we have to do? Now, I know every day I get attacked by somebody or other, whether it's the Washington Post or the New York Times or whatever it is, that you're too bold, your ideas are too radical, how are you going to pay for these ideas? Well, when trillions of dollars have gone from the middle class to the top 1/10 of 1%, I see nothing wrong with an agenda that says maybe that money should come back in a variety of ways to the middle class and to the working families of this country, which is exactly what my political agenda is about. As Secretary Reich just mentioned, when you raise the minimum wage above the $7.25